Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay, and this is Joe Pass Virtuoso Endings, and the title I gave this video is literal. We're going to be looking at endings from Joe Pass's historic 1973 album Virtuoso, which is on the wall right there. That was a game changer for sure. It blew everybody's minds and blew everybody's doors wide open. And I did put together a Joe Pass lesson, I guess that was last September, Joe Pass Jazz Chord Secrets or something like that. And it blew up. I think it has like 36,000 views and a bunch of feedback and comments and excitement. And it's taken me this long to put together another Joe Pass lesson because let's be honest, Joe Pass music is very hard to play. Jazz is really hard to play. And no offense to the bands I'm getting ready to mention, but this is light years away from like AC/DC and Sabbath riffs. Now I love AC/DC and Sabbath, but Joe Pass was literally a musical Jedi. He was like Yoda with the guitar. And anytime you try to tackle some of his music or ideas, you're going to start sweating. You're going to scuff up your fingertips. You're going to be sitting there like, wow, how do I do this? Because his music is very hard. So if this sounds interesting, buckle up, because here we go. The idea behind this lesson actually came from me listening to Joe's classic album Virtuoso. I was in the car, and I've got it on vinyl, but I also have it on CD. This was a couple months ago. I was in the car, driving around. I don't even remember exactly where I was. I was kind of half listening to Virtuoso in the background, and I was at a stoplight, and it was real quiet, and I distinctly heard the end of a song. And I remember thinking, man, that ending was really cool. And then that happened again, like further on down the road, I'm at a stoplight, and I caught the end of another song. And then I had that light bulb moment, like, wait a minute. So I pulled off the road and parked somewhere, and I just sat there in my car and just queued up the ending of every song on Virtuoso. There's 12 tracks. And I sat there in my car and listened to all 12 endings. And I had that light bulb burning bright by then. I was like, wait, I think this is a lesson idea. And the next thing I knew, I started putting this together. So as far as the music and examples in this lesson, we're going to basically approach half of Virtuoso. There's 12 tracks, like I just mentioned a couple times. We're going to look at 6 of the endings for 6 of those songs. And no offense to the songs I didn't include, it's just I noticed like really specific interesting things happening in the songs that I did choose. And the ones I didn't choose, you should definitely check those out and try to learn those too. But we're going to basically look at half of Virtuoso, half of the songs, and we're just looking at the endings. Because in my mind, Joe Pass music, like a complete song, is nearly impossible. At least for me, it's like, man, that would be really hard to tackle a whole song. But you can kind of get a sample and at least kind of reveal some of these little secret moves and cadences and turnarounds and stuff that pop up in Joe's music just by studying the endings. And then once you've looked at the endings, you could check out the intros. And then once you've looked at the intros and endings, then you can start focusing on what happens in the middle. But this is just a strategy and an idea you can approach to any song, whether it's Dixie Dregs or Dream Theater or Joe Pass. So anyway, buckle up. Here we go. All right, with the opening, that was me playing the ending of Joe's cover of Night and Day. Definitely an absolute jazz standard. And there's a really interesting thing happening with these kind of common tones and the chords that he's playing, like this. And I kind of added that harmonic. Joe actually didn't add that harmonic. I kind of put that in there like a cherry on top, which I probably shouldn't have done. But you could probably see and hear, we keep hearing this A with all those chords in the beginning, right? All that sequence and cycle of chords. But there's that common tone A hiding everywhere. So that first chord, that's basically like an E minor 11 flat 5. Like that. These chords are really interesting. So E minor 11 flat 5. And then right there, that's an implied A7 sharp 5 over G right there. And it's sharing that same, that same A note on top, right? And then right there, it's like a G9, like the funk chord. And then it's an F sharp 7 sharp 9, like the Hendrix chord, right? Then right there, take the fretted part, keep that A note, and right there it's just a big stretchy F7. that. So we're not quite done yet, but we've got that, to this, to that G9, there's the Hendrix chord, there's the stretchy F7, and then we're going to this. It's like an implied E minor 11 right there. And then we've got this nasty booger, and that's like an A7 flat 5 over E flat. So it has the flat 5 and the bass down there. That's really nasty. So there's that sequence of chords, real slow. Right? And then that little, and then he ends with this little, like that. And that's like a D flat, D flat major 9 over A flat to a D9 over A. Now Joe might be doing like a bar with his middle finger to grab those two root notes, but I'm actually using my thumb there just to kind of clean that up a little bit. So I'm not really honestly sure how Joe played that either with the bar, and you're kind of lifting that up so you can also hit the that F note there on the D string. But like I said, I kind of like using my thumb there for the root note, like that, and then all the way through it, and it's really challenging. And the harmonic's optional, but that's the ending of Night and Day. Okay, next up's Joe's ending to the standard, Stella By Starlight, definitely a jazz standard. And really, Virtuoso is just filled with jazz standards, and it's Joe playing through them, you know, solo guitar. And it's just amazing. It's like, wow, you can hear everything, and it's just him and a guitar. But on this, it has this dreamlike, it kind of reminds me of like Walt Disney, When You Wish Upon a Star. I mean, it sounds like something Jiminy Cricket would play on guitar, like this. One more time. And he's really targeting like that really high G. It's all implied chords, of course, but he's got like this little part, like a melodic, G major arpeggio. Like that's the opening right there. The opening of the ending, I guess. And then this D and F sharp, and then an E flat and an A right there. And that E flat and A, there's contrary motion right here. You know, one note's going down, the other note's going up. So that's contrary motion. You know, that E flat and A is going to change to a D and a B. So that E flat's going to D, A is going up to B. Like that. And then it's going to happen again right here. And again. And again. And that's how he gets to that final G at the end. With that contrary motion. That's so cool. Like that. Okay, next up's the ending to Here's That Rainy Day. This is one of my favorites from Virtuoso, and this ending is really cool, like this. One more time, like this. So this is really, really cool. We're going to start right here. And that's an A minor 7 flat 5 flat 13, right? And then right there, that's a D13 sus 4 implied. And then right there, D13 flat 9 implied. And I love that sequence right here to here to here. You know, those three chords really complement, themselves. It sounds good, like the kind of the way it kind of flows or whatever. And then you got this nasty little booger back here. That's like like an F sharp 13 flat 9 implied. And then just end with G major 7 right there. So one more time on this one. Super cool too. Okay, next up's the ending to Sweet Lorraine, and this is interesting because there's like this turnaround lick in the beginning and then 3 chords at the end, and the last chord's one of Joe's kind of trademark stretch voicings, like in the upper register, but something like this. One more time. So you got this kind of G7 lick. And then, like that. So that's really, really cool. And then it's an A flat 13 here. And then it's a G 13 here, and add that high E, like the G on top. Right? And then he does this, which that's an implied like G7 sus2 way up there. You know, you're kind of barring the 10th fret. And you're playing the A, G, and the B, and then you're grabbing that really high G on the 15th way up there on the high E, like that. So an implied G7 sus2. So right there we're doing, you know, something like that. Really cool. Okay, next up's Joe's ending to the song All the Things You Are, and this is yet another absolute classic jazz standard. And this is short and sweet. This is just 3 chords, and you're hearing this like kind of chromatic movement. You know, like in the bass or whatever, and he's doing one more time there. You know, super jazzy. So we've already seen a few of these chords, like right there, that's an F sharp 13 implied, right? We had that earlier in a different key. And then right there, that's an implied G13 flat 9. And then right there, that's an implied A flat 6 9. Hearing that bass kind of move chromatically right up to that A flat, and then you're hearing those chords kind of twist and mutate their way into that final chord like that, and that's really cool. Super jazzy too. Okay, last but not least is the ending that Joe played during the song Blues for Allison. And this is, I'm not gonna lie, this is really hard. It's really stretchy. And this is the example, like at the beginning of this video when I shared like the stretch warning. This is the reason the stretch warning was added to this video. It's really stretchy, but of course it's really cool too, like this. Something like that. So this is crazy, and basically Joe starts with this, and then moves to that. So that first chord, that's like a G sharp 7 sus2 flat 13 implied, like that. And then right there, that's G7 sus2. We actually had that chord earlier in the lesson. That's Joe's, you know, kind of trademark stretch voicing, because we're going from this to that. And then you're going to basically play the open A and do it again right here off F sharp. So now you're playing an F sharp 7 sus2 flat 13, and then you're moving to F7 sus2, like that. And then you're going to do it again starting on E. So right there, now it's an E7 sus2 flat 13 to an E flat 7 sus2, which that's crazy. And then you're going to do it one more time right there. So now E flat 7 sus2 flat 13 to a D7 sus2. He's got this little slid thing to a little part of like G7, like G7 over F. This cool like blues lick. And then you're walking up chromatically F7, F sharp 7 to G7, right? You know, at the end. So that's very intimidating. That's crazy with these big stretches. And you go slow and just kind of make it happen. Obviously don't hurt yourself, because that's a big stretch, especially when you start moving your way down there. hard to play, and you can hurt yourself because those are definitely like Holdsworth type stretches. A great stretching workout though. Or something like that. Definitely, Joe Pass was a master. That's crazy. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at Joe Pass Virtuoso Endings. And I'm not going to lie, I can't play like Joe Pass. I wish I could play like Joe Pass. I'm working on it. But basically, I approach jazz and classical almost the same way. You know, I'm a rocker at heart. I'm a rock musician. I love blues and funk. You know, I've studied classical and jazz, you know, and I love metal and progressive rock and tons of stuff. But jazz and classical, I view this way. I view it like a giant mountain, like Mount Vesuvius or Mount Everest or Mount Fuji or whatever. And it's this huge mountain. And you can't help but look at the top and think, well, will I ever get to the top? You know? But for me, I just like kind of scaling on the side, like just kind of going up a little bit. I'll investigate and practice some stuff. And then as soon as I'm done climbing on Jazz Mountain or Classical Mountain, then I get off the mountain and I go right back to Rocktown or Funkville or wherever I'm, you know, exploring aside from the jazz and classical stuff. But that's the way I feel like a tourist or a visitor. You know, I'm on this like jazz or classical adventure. And then after I've kind of explored and my head's full and my fingers are scuffed, then I go back to my comfort zone, which is somewhere in blues and rock land. But that's my approach. Maybe that's not the best way to approach this, but that's what I've consistently done technically since I was in high school. You know, study some classical and then go back to rockland and then study some jazz and then check out, you know, some acoustic music or funk or something and just continually mix things up, exploring and sampling, you know, different styles of music. I've grabbed jazz things and brought it back into rock, you know, land. I've grabbed rock things and tried to stick it in jazz land. So it's interesting to kind of mix and challenge yourself. If you get bored musically with one style, jump into a totally different style and see what happens. You might love it or you might hate it. You know, you don't really know till you try it. But for me, I love the challenge of just, you know, can I do this? You know, can I even play that? And I'll sit there and kind of work on it and eventually, you know, polish it to where I can actually play it. And with Joe Pass, I mean, forget about it. That's like the top shelf, you know, jazz guitarist. Very difficult, very hard. And of course, this music was just pouring out of him. You know, it was nothing to him. I'm sure everything I just demonstrated and played would have been considered easy to Joe Pass. But like I said, I'm not Joe Pass. I can't play like that. I'd love to. I'm still tackling and kind of working on it. But that's a very high mountain to climb. So just a heads up. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.